Agency for Healthcare Administration Secretary, Palm Beach County Mayor Sarah Baxter, great to see you. City of Westlake Mayor John Paul O'Connor, and then we also have Darcy, who's our President and CEO of Healthcare District of Palm Beach County, so thank you as well. It was great to see you. I was telling some of the folks before we came in the hold room, we're going through the budget for the next fiscal year, which begins on July 1st, and we've worked really hard to make sure Florida is fiscally responsible. That budget, the way the legislature did it is, they say, here's the budget number, but then they put other stuff in that they don't count on that, and I think you got to count everything. So when you count everything, it's about $800 million more than in current year. We're spending less this year than we did last year and less last year than the year before. So I want to keep that trend going. So we're going to be having to do some line item vetoes, get that budget underneath the level of current year. And so that'll be 4 straight years where we have had the budget be reduced in the state of Florida. And that's ultimately good for taxpayers. It's good for efficiency. It's good for a lot of different things. Part of that, we were in the cabinet meeting earlier this week, and we had our bond finance presentation about Florida's historic debt reduction program that I launched since 1840s till the present. The amount of taxpayer-supported debt that Florida's accumulated, just in my tenure, we've retired 50% of that for the whole Florida's history. And so we've seen a big acceleration of that. We've saved on interest. We've even saved on principal in certain things because, sometimes these bonds, even though we have a AAA credit rating, these bonds on the open market, isn't exactly like SpaceX IPO, right? I mean, sometimes you can get them for cheaper, and our guys have been very smart about doing that when they can. So we've been able to retire 50% of the debt, now have the rainy day fund, which when I became governor till now has been quadrupled. So the next year's budget will top that off a little bit. We're not allowed to put any more at that point, so it's totally maxed out. And look, I don't know, what's going to happen in the economy down the line, but the economy is cyclical. There are ups and there are downs, and so by having a fully funded rainy day fund, you're in a position to be able to have the cushion that you need at the state level to be able to deal with whatever comes our way. We did a little bit during COVID when we had a lot of uncertainty in those initial weeks, and I vetoed a lot of money. I vetoed a lot of my stuff because I had the budget at the time. And it turned out, we had an approach that really was conducive to the economy, and we ended up getting all this tax revenue in just because of the economic activity. But you don't know, things go up and down in this world, so we're prepared for that, and I think that that's really, really good. We are doing some tax cuts at the state level, including our Second Amendment outdoor taxes, no sales tax from September 1st till the end of the year. I know a lot of people saved a lot of money on everything from hunting supplies to ammunition, all these other things. It's great. We want people to do it. Back to school will start July 20th this year instead of August 1st. So the dates have been changed. So I think it runs from the 20th of July to the 20th of August. But that is permanent to where there's no tax on those school items. And then, of course, our disaster preparedness is permanent in law now, where you get no tax on those key disaster supplies. So we're continuing doing that, and I know a lot of people are, appreciate that. It's not like it's, thousands of dollars that you're saving on back-to-school supplies, but you do save some, and we like that. We are now in hurricane season. We had the hurricane summit, I think a couple weeks ago, and I tell people, every year I was governor, it's always worst hurricane season ever. Like, no matter what, they would say that, right? And I'm just like, how do you know this? I mean, seriously, it's just so. And sometimes we'd have none. Sometimes 2024 we had 3, right? So this year, because we've had this drought, I guess the thought is that it doesn't lead to big hurricane seasons. So people, some of the quote experts are saying, well, maybe expect more modest. That actually has me more worried when they're predicting modest. So we're prepared for that. I would urge folks to take advantage of our disaster preparedness tax breaks and make sure that you're prepared. You never know, and we're going to be prepared. And I would much rather them say it's going to be really bad, because I think the chance of it not being that probably is pretty good. When they say it may not be bad, well, then I worry, what are they missing here, right? So we'll be ready to go, and we'll handle that. So all that being said, we're in good shape. We're going through the budget. I got to pare it back a little bit, but it'll basically be, I mean, put this in perspective. New York State is the closest to Florida in population. I think they have 19.5 million people. We've got 23.5 million residents in the state of Florida, and yet their budget is over twice the size of our budget. In fact, well over twice, because the budget that I'll sign will be somewhere in the $117 billion range all in. I think New York State's budget's over $260 billion, and they're serving, obviously, far fewer people. But then I think if you look around, and we've got a lot, certainly in Palm Beach County, there's a lot of people that have experience in both areas. I mean, are the roads better there with all that money? No, not at all. You know, services, of course not. So it almost as if government becomes an interest group in and of itself, and it just continues to grow. We, by having 4 straight years of spending reduction, we're really doing something that is out of the ordinary in this country, and we're proud of that. So that's great. We can bang our chest and say how fiscally responsible and all this stuff, but it's really never enough. You've always got to do more. And we've been working with the Trump administration on the initiative combating fraud in federal programs, but particularly from a state, because we have involvement in the Medicaid program, to do whatever we can to root out as much fraud as possible. And they've been very helpful. I know that this is something that's been a priority for CMS and Dr. Oz, and we're thankful for that. Siobhan Harris, she had been working on this anyways and been doing stuff, and she's been able to roll out some really good reforms. But this is a way where we can continue to do better for the people of Florida. And as much as look, you got to call a spade. If you look around the country at fraud for various things, financial fraud, any kind of fraud, any type of stuff, there are certain hot spots in the United States. Unfortunately, Southeast Florida is one of those. It just is. It's always been. Maybe not as bad in Palm Beach as Miami, but it's still, I think, all 3 of those. In fact, we did the legal reform that's helped. Now you see the insurance. USAA just announced $1 billion reduction for Florida policy members. Progressive has issued rebates. People are like, oh my gosh, I got $400 or $600 or whatever back. When has that ever happened? The reason why that's happening is because the market has changed, because we did the litigation reform. And instead of being to where it was more driven to pay lawyers, it was more aligned with, quite frankly, a lot of other states that have done it better than Florida over the years with respect to legal reform. And that's now you're seeing the savings passed on to consumers. But when we were doing that, we were looking at the costs of litigation for the home policies. And Florida was said to have 8% of the claims nationwide, but represent 78% of the litigation expenses nationwide. Well, guess what? That is going to be passed on to individual policyholders, so clearly that needed to be done. It did. Things have gotten better. But the interesting thing about that, I think those numbers were like 2021, 2022 time period. The majority of that massive litigation costs were in 3 counties, Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach. Now, the interesting thing about that is over this period from 2016 until 2023, 22, 23, where we did have hurricanes, you didn't have them in this part of Florida. Palm Beach had not had, Broward had not had, Dade County may have had a little from Irma, but very, very modest. They thought it was going to hit, then it kind of came around. And so it's like, wait a minute, this isn't even Fort Myers after Ian or some of these other places or some of the areas that got whacked by Irma. these are 3 counties that are costing all this in litigation expenses that had no real impact from those storms. And so that tells you when the system's out of kilter. So the reality is that has been a problem, I think, for a long time. So we're here today to announce our next steps to be able to combat. And it's not just limited to these 3 counties. I want to be clear. This is something that applies statewide for sure. But I think if you looked and you totaled up, I think clearly the majority of it would be in this part of the state. So we are rolling out new major actions to continue to strengthen the integrity of Florida's program and to crack down on fraud. First, ACA is launching a pilot program with Centilink, a leading identity fraud detection company that specializes in uncovering sophisticated fraud schemes and verifying identities at scale. This will help identify stolen IDs, synthetic IDs, hidden ownership structures, and other suspicious activity before bad actors are able to benefit. Rather than waiting until these dollars have already been lost, we want to take a proactive approach to prevent them from being lost before it happens. The agency will use these tools to conduct enhanced screening of providers before they enter the program and to identify suspicious activity among existing providers. Second, ACA has imposed enrollment moratoriums on certain high-risk provider categories, including durable medical equipment suppliers and adult daycare providers. For far too long, that we've relied on a pay and chase model where fraudulent claims are paid first and then investigated years later. That approach is costly, that approach is inefficient, and ultimately it's not fair to taxpayers. By pausing new enrollments in these high-risk categories, Florida can implement stronger screening measures, deploy more advanced analytics, and ensure proper oversight before additional providers enter the system. Third, ACA is launching a comprehensive statewide revalidation effort for all active Florida Medicaid providers. Every provider will be required to verify their credentials and identity as part of the process. Providers who fail to respond or do not meet program requirements will be removed from the program. This will include real-time monitoring tools, access to third-party data sources, enhanced background screening, and advanced identity intelligence capabilities designed to identify fraudulent actors and disqualifying information. Also use those tools to review claims data and identify potentially fraudulent billing practices. Other state agencies will be providing investigative, regulatory, and victim support resources to identify vulnerable individuals, document abuse and exploitation, and assist with intervention and recovery efforts. I want to thank Siobhan. I want to thank the agency, as well as appreciate Dr. Oz really spearheading this from the federal level. And we've worked very constructively with folks at HHS and CMS, and we'll continue to do so. So buckle up. Some of these guys that aren't behaving well, they're going to have a lot more to deal with these new reforms. So Siobhan, do you want to talk?
Good afternoon, everyone. Siobhan Harris, Secretary for the Agency for Healthcare Administration. Thank you so much, Governor, for your continued leadership and support throughout all of our efforts at the agency and throughout the state. ACA is proud to lead this work, and our team is ready to deliver. Florida's Medicaid program covers nearly 4 million recipients here in our state, highlighting the importance of protecting the program for the people who rely on it. The governor's right. State fraud, we see more evidence of it here in South Florida, but it can happen anywhere. Just here recently in West Palm Beach, we saw activity that underscores the severity of the problem. More than a dozen entities presenting themselves as Medicaid providers were in fact staged operations. They were created for one purpose only: to steal from the state and from a program designed to support our most vulnerable recipients. This is not a paperwork issue or breakdown in process. This is fraud, plain and simple. What exposed these providers was a combination of things: addresses shared across multiple unrelated entities, ownership structures that didn't hold up under scrutiny, and no evidence of actual patient care taking place. In one particular location, our investigators went out and the neighbor said when they started their operation, they came in, they decorated, they were there for maybe a week or so, and we haven't seen them since. These are the red flags our investigators are trained to find. Our job is to stay ahead of it, and that's exactly what we're doing. Program integrity is built into everything we do: continuous provider reviews, revalidation cycles, and monitoring across every service area. Over the last 2 years, we've significantly strengthened our enforcement posture, doubling the amount of overpayments recovered through fraud and abuse activities. During that same period, ACA has terminated or denied enrollment to more than 3,200 providers, safeguarding the program and preventing future attempts to exploit it. The governor mentioned the moratoriums that we've put in place. With federal approval, these moratoria allow us to address clear, concentrated fraud risks while maintaining access to legitimate care. We're using these tools judiciously, but will not hesitate to expand its use if deemed necessary. Attorney General Uthmeyer's Medicaid Fraud Control Unit remains one of our most critical partners in protecting the integrity of Florida's Medicaid program. Through enhanced information sharing, joint intelligence briefings, coordinated case discussions, and robust data analytics support, ACA and MFCU are now able to respond more quickly and more strategically to emerging threats. This strengthened collaboration ensures local intelligence is put to work immediately in support of ongoing investigations. Partnership in this is vital. We use our Managed Care Plan Special Investigations Unit as force multipliers in combating fraud, and then with this most recent collaboration with CentiLink, we will further strengthen our outcomes. Their platform processes data at a scale our traditional tools cannot match. Again, as the governor mentioned, flagging synthetic identities, conceal ownership arrangements, and on and on. What used to require days of manual review will now be flagged in minutes. Our staff will have an advanced investigative tool that supports faster, more informed decisions at every stage of oversight. And to reinforce these safeguards, all providers will be going through the revalidation process. In Florida Medicaid, providers are required to re-enroll every 3 to 5 years. Over the next 12 to 24 months, all providers will have to be re-enrolled in Medicaid and will undergo this enhanced scrutiny. Providers who do not respond will be disenrolled from Medicaid. This effort uses automatic risk monitoring tools, AI-driven identity analytics, and enhanced claims data reviews to identify high-risk providers and strengthen the program's protections. We have one of the strongest program integrity programs in the nation. Our efforts have already saved $136.45 million in recovery and prevention benefits. I have one message for those who aim to fabricate their provider credentials, hide behind a shell company, or steal from Florida's most vulnerable residents. We're coming for you. We have more tools, more investigators, and more resolve than ever. Find another state, because our state is closed to fraud.
All right. Good job. Good job. You know, part of this is, anything government does, you have opportunities, people have opportunities to try to exploit, no doubt, and there's a lot that goes on to try to combat that. But healthcare is such a train wreck in terms of how it's funded and the prices. Nobody knows how much anything costs. And so if you don't know how much anything costs, then the ability to try to charge this, and it's just a total shell game. You go into the hospital, the hospital charges the insurance this and has no bearing really on anything that was actually done, and that's been going on for an awful long time. And obviously, just with what we're doing here is not gonna change that meaningfully at all. And I think it really needs to be something that's done nationally so that we actually have markets again and people can see and have transparency into how much things cost. Because when that's the case, you typically will have incentives to deliver it at lower cost. When it's all just through third party and you try to charge the third party as much as possible, well, you end up with these shell games. And so because the way healthcare is financed in this country, this type of stuff, there's just an invitation for people because they think they can get away with it. You wouldn't be able, to go start charging $120,000 for a Toyota Camry, right? It's just like no one would buy it. Everyone would know. But you can charge here or here. You could do a fake pay, all this stuff. And it's just more opaque, and it's harder to be able to see for folks. And so I think these tools, the technological tools, will be very beneficial. And I'm also just hoping technology, we hear a lot about it. And I remember when the internet became big, they said it was going to make healthcare cheaper. It really hasn't done that. But some of the stuff we're seeing with some of these advanced systems, they're promising that, and maybe that will. I know Tampa General just announced they had they were doing something with Palantir, and they've reduced, I think, by 50% sepsis in their hospital because when it starts, it's hard to detect, and now they have an ability to detect. So hopefully we'll see some of that really come online and make things a little bit more cost-effective than what they've been. I think that was really promising news to see, and hopefully there's more along the way. Okay, do we have any questions back there? Yes.
Do you think that there should be a debate at the upcoming Sunshine Showdown between the gubernatorial candidates, considering that apparently Congressman Byron Donalds was the only candidate to qualify to be on the debate stage?
Yeah, there should be a debate. They said they were going to do a debate. They didn't put out the criteria publicly. I don't think the RPOF ever voted on any type of criteria. I've heard secondhand what the criteria was. I wouldn't have qualified when I ran in 18 for what they were trying to do. And so it's counterproductive when you try to engineer an outcome because you need a coalition of voters to do well. And this may be a tough cycle for Republicans if you look at some of the indicators, the way things are trending. And so having an open process and having people be able to have their say is always better than to try to engineer an outcome. So what the party should be doing is doing what's in the best interest of Republican voters. You shouldn't have another agenda. You shouldn't be answering to anyone else other than the voters there. Now, having said that, this whole notion that the party should control debates is ridiculous. You don't need the party to control. They have no authority to control debates. We did a debate when I was running 18. We did one on Fox News. And had nothing to do with I think the party was involved in terms of like getting people to attend, but we did it, they put it on TV. And so you can do something like that having nothing to do with the party. The party has a very limited role. It's really should be a candidate-driven process and not for people to be making decisions who voters have never voted into those positions to begin with. So line up something with TV, line up something, radio, all these different forms. Podcast, there's a whole host of ways that you can do, but to just set criteria, especially with polling when most people haven't started paying attention. Like qualifying just ended today. So up until 11:59 this morning, you could have qualified to run in these races. So it isn't like that this has been, now the fields for all these offices are set and people can go do it. So I think to do those types of criteria, I think ultimately is counterproductive. I think you alienate people for no reason. And look, we've had a great run in Florida. But part of it is, we've really, I think respected the voters and worked really hard to build that trust and support that has seen us go from 300,000 more registered Democrats when I got elected in 18 to now 1.5 million more registered Republicans. I mean, I won this county in 2022, Palm Beach. First time in 40 years a Republican was able to do that. And Palm Beach, what used to have 170,000 gap between DNR, that gap has narrowed dramatically to where you potentially could have Palm Beach have a plurality of Republican registrants, but I think that complicates it if people don't have confidence in the party label and the party brand. So that's kind of how I would view it. Yes.
Governor DeSantis, can I ask you about property taxes?
Sure.
Talk to a lot of folks who are excited about property tax reduction and the opportunity to vote on that, but they're worried that the counties will figure out other ways to get the money that they need. So is there anything that the state can do to prohibit the counties from finding other ways to get that money?
Of course. I mean, there's no reason to do this unless it's going to make Floridians better off. Floridians, Americans, I mean, we see now inflation going up again in the most recent reports. Obviously, energy. Really, since the response to COVID, we've seen this. And so how can we make a meaningful impact? Well, we've done a lot in the state. We've made a lot of things tax-free. We did the toll relief, 50% reduction. We've done a lot of things over the years. But if you talk to people about like the thing government can really control, taxes, the number one things people want relief from are the property taxes. And so that's why we want to do it. It'll be very meaningful for people. But you don't just rob Peter to pay Paul. What you want to say, and look, this is not even, because a lot of these people, Sarah's my friend. There are a lot of great people, but the reality is, if you look statewide in 2019, local property tax revenue to all local government things was $32 billion. Today it's $60 billion. So that's almost a doubling of property tax revenue in a 7-year period. You look at some places, they've had more than a doubling of their budgets in a 7 or 8 year period. Now look, we've had population growth, we've had inflation. So even if you assume that $32 billion was 100% well spent, which it wasn't, but let's assume, okay, you're going to be more than that, but you ain't going to be 60. You'd be 42, 44, 45 billion, and that delta is way more than even what this property tax would do. So I don't think continuing to have the budgets go up the way it has, it's not sustainable. It is not sustainable. They're projecting by 2031 that it'll be $83 billion of property taxes collected in the state of Florida. That's a 12-year run where you've gone from 32 to 83 billion. No way. So that is, I think, something. So what we will do is, I think, a couple things. One, and so what I proposed is not what the legislature put on the ballot. I did the calculator. Everyone could see that does not apply to what they put on. They put on something that was different. I think it's going to be good for taxpayers. It wasn't as significant as I had hoped. Because, my view is like, we're just so used to getting taxed that, like, when I started talking about like homestead, I'm like, well, your homestead has all these legal protections in Florida. It's judgment proof. They can't take it from you in lawsuits and stuff. If you get sued, all these things, and then there's certain tax benefits, valuation. I was like, well, why not just make that tax free? How much revenue would that be? It'd be, in some places are more than others. We have bedroom communities that have probably a majority of their revenue there. We have other places like Miami-Dade where that's a fraction of what they do. So it's just like, this is like, man, imagine if you were able to pull that off, how you could do it. And so what I proposed would have gotten us there, not in day one, but it would have gotten us there. But it would have required a commitment of the state to take this massive surplus we have and to be able to provide grants for the cities, the counties, and the education to the extent that was necessary. I don't believe in backfill, because backfill means whatever you were spending must be right. But certain things that are important, of course we're going to do that. We need to do that. But that's a big commitment. And I think the voters were there. Certainly our voters were there. I think some of the legislators weren't quite on board with that. But I think as they run in future elections, they're going to need to get on board with it. I was telling folks the other day, it's kind of like that scene in Back to the Future where Marty is performing at the Enchantment Under the Sea dance, and he starts doing Johnny Be Good. And so, like, this is 1955, right? So everyone's kind of like, they're like having fun. This is like, oh, this is new, this is exciting. And then he kind of just breaks into like a heavy metal guitar riff, and he's like kicking over the speakers on the ground, doing all this stuff. And then by the time he's done, everyone's just sitting there looking at him like he's got 6 heads, quiet. And he goes up to him, to the mic, and he just says, well, that may be a little bit too much for you, but your kids are going to love it. And I kind of feel like the homestead property exemption is something that's going to continue to pick up steam, as we go forward. So that was why, in my proposal, I put a fund in there to be able to help local government, because we're running out of taxes to cut in Florida. We do have the sales tax. The problem with that is a lot of foreigners and snowbirds pay that, right? So when you're cutting that, you're cutting tax for non-Florida. I'd rather just cut tax for Floridians. But anyways, there's a lot of things going on with that. But then the other thing you're going to need to do is do the equivalent of like a taxpayer bill of rights, where you set the baseline of local government spending and you only allow it to increase consistent with inflation and population growth. And then anything above that goes back to the taxpayer in the form. That will obviate the need to be able to do that, because they're not going to be able to just keep spending. And then it's also the case this, even if we didn't do any of that, people say, oh, well, if you reduce property tax, they may try to do a fee. But here's the difference. A property tax, they don't have to raise the tax. They can just say your property's worth more. Oh, the appraisal came in, we're going to charge more. When they do a tax or a fee, they've got to vote on that, and they don't want like being on record voting on that, because then you can vote them out. So I think that there's going to be protections in the implementing bill against that. There needs to be. I'm going to be supportive of that. But I just think I would ask people, just look honestly, do you think you needed to go from 32 to 60 billion? If you say we went to spending levels of 2024, 2025, would the sky fall? Forget, I'm willing to help with grants, but put that aside, even if we didn't, would the sky fall, or could we get it done? And so what we've basically, I think, Floridians have been told to do in terms of the property tax situation by folks on the local level is, just you got to pay it and figure it out. We've got to do all this. And I think what this does is it says, well, wait a minute, we're going to give the taxpayers the preference, and then the government folks will figure it out, and we'll get it done. But I've already said, even though they didn't put the stuff that I had recommended on creating a fund, I'm supportive of, providing support but we cannot grow the same way that we have grown in terms of government there. Now, people will say, oh, well, this. The one thing the legislature and me can say, especially if I sign the budget with another spending reduction, 4 straight years of spending reductions at the state level in Florida. Our budget on July 1st will not only be less than the budget in current year, it will be less than the budget the year before, and less than the budget the year before that. How many people can even cut the budget 1 year, much less have a budget 4 years out that's spending less, not in inflation-adjusted terms. Yes, it spends less in inflation-adjusted terms, but in nominal terms. Even though we've had inflation, our budget is still less. No games, nominal number, it's less. So we've shown, I think, it can be done. And what are we doing with the money that we are spending? We've done the largest environmental restoration in the history of the United States of America with the Everglades restoration. We've got the C-44 reservoir. We've got the C-43 reservoir. We've got the Everglades EAA reservoir. I've got the federal government delegating me projects and paying for it, and our guys are doing it, and we're advancing that. No one's ever seen that type of progress that we've made over these 7 years, and that's historic. That's multi-generational. That's going to make a difference, and we've put a lot of money into it. But guess what? Because we were the ones to step up to do it, 2, 3, 4 years down the line, you are not going to need to spend what we've spent during my tenure on that, because we will have the infrastructure in place to be able to restore the water the way God intended it to flow. You look at what we've done with infrastructure, massive infusion of infrastructure, accelerating road projects. I know I got stuff in Palm Beach County that we're supportive of to be able to do. Part of Florida, Miami's tough. We're doing the 395, which is going to be good, that interchange. But it's tough because it was built out, and so you can't really do a loop. It's harder to do some of those things. I remember Elon Musk told me that he wanted to do tunnels. I'm like, I don't know that that's going to be something that people, are going to want to drive their car, get out, and then take an EV in the tunnel. It's not the way Florida rolls in June, July, August. People want to stay in the AC, right? So there's all these but as you get kind of in other parts outside, we've been able to do a lot to not only respond to the growth, but even get ahead of some of the growth. But that's been a historic investment that we've been able to do. Look what we've done with teacher salaries. We created a special fund in the education budget that money goes to school districts. They can only use it for teacher pay. And this year, I think it's by far the most, $1.55 billion, I think, and $200 million of that can only go for teachers that have been 10 years or more, because we started with minimum salary for the newcomers, because we figured, like, if people don't have, adequate to even live, they're not going to leave college, graduate college, and want to come to the school system. So we wanted to make it more attractive, and we have the #1 average minimum salary in the Southeast, but that now they say, well, what about the experience? Well, now you have the biggest increase for experienced teachers that we've ever done. These are major, major things. That's all being done within the context of a budget that is declining, and not just real terms, but nominal terms. And of course, if you look at inflation-adjusted per capita spending in Florida at the state level, it's less today and will be after this budget, than when I took office, because the budget nominally is higher from 2019, especially with COVID. We went up in inflation. I had to put in money for more projects, but on a per capita inflation-adjusted basis, it's actually lower. So we can do this. Don't let anyone tell you you can't. And guess what? Taxpayers, if they're saving with the property tax, what are they going to do with it? I mean, some may buy SpaceX stock or invest, but like a lot of people are going to put it back into the economy. I mean, that's just the reality. And you have so much right now in our economy. This is a whole nother conversation, and I don't want to suggest that this is the primary reason for property tax. But if you look at folks who are in kind of the middle class, working class, from a consumer perspective, there's a lot of data that shows they're tapped out. Because things have gotten expensive, and that most of the consumer spending is driven by kind of the top maybe 20%. These are people that are invested in the market. Equities have gone up. They've done well, even though they've had inflation. The market's been able to outrun that. Certainly recently that's been the case. And so that consumer spending there is really what's kind of kept the economy. You have a market correction. Those people are not going to be spending as much. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. So being able to have more money in the pocket of kind of the backbone of the state, kind of the middle class, the working class folks, that is going to be a really, really big deal, and I think it'll have good economic benefits.
Thank you for your answer and your reference to Back to the Future McFly. I appreciate that.
It's probably the only, is there another movie series that had 3 really good movies? I mean, because, Godfather 3, I guess Rocky, I would say the first 4 Rockies were good. 5, not as much. But I mean, they did 3 really, really good movies. And I think anyone who's, I'm on the very tail end of Gen X. I'm like one of the younger Gen X guys out there. But anyone that was kind of growing up in that point, that was just definitely a cultural reference for us. So, okay, thanks, guys. Have a good one.